Why would she? Why would a nurse, whose job it was to care for babies, murder and harm them in the hospital where she worked?
This was a cruel, calculated and cynical campaign of child murder involving the smallest and most vulnerable of children, knowing that your actions were causing significant physical suffering.
Letby always denied harming the babies in her care, but the evidence told a different, more harrowing story.
And now more evidence has come out, and we're going to deal with that in this analysis. I'll also be answering the question, why? Why did Lucy do this? Why did this nurse who was trusted abuse that trust in the way that she did?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head,
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Breaking news, Lucy Letby of Hereford was convicted of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 others, including one that she tried to kill twice. She's serving 15 whole life prison sentences. A recent inquiry has revealed 2 additional serious incidents implicating Lucy in behavior that could have killed or seriously harmed not 1 but 2 infants in her care. That would make a total of 16 separate incidents targeting these little babies. What is fascinating, troubling and disturbing as well is how Lucy responded to being discovered in both instances. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Also, if you're interested in the murder of Meredith Kercher, that's the Amanda Knox case, head to the hashtag 17 years ago today MK. I'll put a link to that in the description. I am reviewing the timeline in chronological order. The end of this month is the 17-year anniversary of Meredith Kercher's murder. I've also written a couple of books on the subject, and I'll be heading to Perugia later this month to visit the crime scene in person. Also, look out for my coverage of the Amanda Knox case on this channel over the next couple of days. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, and as I say, stay tuned till the end of the episode where we'll talk about why. Please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So let me ask you, before we jump into the analysis, 2 questions. Number 1, when Lucy was found out, do you think she demonstrated contrition, regret, remorse? Did she apologize? Or did she grudgingly acknowledge that she might have made an error? Which do you think it is? Number 2, secondly, would you trust Lucy with your own infant? Given all the evidence that's been brought forward, all of the stories, all the information, if you still believe she's innocent, would you want your own or a family member's infant to be allowed in her care? Would you feel completely comfortable doing that? Whatever your answer, I'll be asking the question again at the end of this analysis, and we'll see whether some hearts and minds may have changed over the course of this analysis. If it has, let me know in the comments. Have you ever heard the saying, where there's smoke, there's fire? Well, when it comes to serial killers, there are often potentially more crimes hidden in the ether than we know about. And now an inquiry has revealed 2 more serious incidents involving Lucy Letby. Now, before we dip into the fabric of the 2 incidents, please allow me to briefly sketch a little psychological perspective. And this is sort of approaching the whole why of it. And I think we begin that process by saying, why not? Why didn't Lucy commit this crime or these crimes? I think this must be appreciated within the context of a sort of backlash against Lucy's guilty verdict, something that has been gathering in momentum, where certain British experts are putting their hands up and announcing their more expert knowledge of what really happened. And poor Lucy Letby is actually being made a scapegoat, because actually what's wrong here is Britain's corrupt health system. Let's put that on trial. In other words, the Letby case has been turned into a political football. because it feels right and because it honors some people's sense of victimhood and wanting to blame the government. They want Lucy to be innocent. So can you see it's out of a sense of powerlessness that people feel they want to blame the government. They want to score a point against the government. That is exactly, and if you're one of those people, then you have a similar psychology to Lucy Letby. That it's out of a sense of powerlessness that you want to get your revenge in some way. And you might say, powerless how? Well, there were many ways in which Lucy was powerless. We'll deal with that a little bit later. So now the question arises, does this new evidence support these feelings that no, it's the NHI that's responsible? Or does it support something else? If you can't tell the difference between whether there's a serial killer in your community or whether almost a dozen deaths are the deliberate work of a serial killer or not, let's say up to 16 incidents, you can't say, I think this person is responsible, then you may have a serious problem dealing with your own reality as well as the real world.
And here we go.
Right, so let's get started dealing with these two incidents. It's new information, and we are going to refer to an article from the BBC. Quote, Lucy Letby gave a baby 10 times the prescribed dose of morphine in error 2 years before her killing spree began. That's according to a public inquiry. Now, you might say, well, that's just an accusation. She was confronted about this and she responded to the confrontation, basically acknowledging that she did do this. She did actually do this. Now, if you understand serial killers, you know they don't just suddenly start killing people. It doesn't just randomly, impulsively happen in a sort of a fragment. It is connected to a much wider dynamic. The criminal psychology, just like it does with other crimes and criminals, it evolves over time. Lucy may have gotten a thrill when she made mistakes and then caught herself and then realized that she held someone else's entire life in her hands. Not only that person's life, but the lives of that person's entire families, their hopes, their dreams. And that again is giving you a sense of why. Why? Because in her own life she felt very small and very powerless, and yet she could exert tremendous power into other people's lives. But this is the important part. When confronted, her response is extremely telling. Quote, the nurse was then unhappy at being told she could no longer administer controlled drugs at the Countess of Chester Hospital after the incident in July 2013. Why does she feel this way? Because she's no longer in control. Someone else is exerting power over her. And a lot of that feeling of powerlessness is feeling that you're not in control. And so exerting power gives one a sense of being in control. That is a big part of the why in this case. The article goes on to note the Thirlwall inquiry, which is examining how she was able to kill and attack babies between June 2015 and June 2016, a year, over a period of a year. It heard that Letby received extra training after this incident in July 2013, which was essentially 2 years earlier. Yvonne Farmer, who was practice development nurse at the time, told the inquiry at Liverpool Town Hall it was a very serious error, this prescribing 10 times the morphine dose. The mistake was spotted quickly and the baby suffered no ill effects, the inquiry heard. You might say, that was just a random error. Was it? Ms. Farmer said that Letby was not far into her nursing career at the time, but was outside the period of supervision required by the Nursing and Midwifery Council. Part of the hospital's response to the incident was to make Letby have extra training with Ms. Farmer. She said, Lucy Letby was unhappy that she had to refrain from administering controlled drugs for a period of time. Does that seem like contrition or resentment? You may remember in my initial assessment of Lucy that I described her as a mollycoddled only child. That is the same as, in terms of the family dynamic, a person feeling like they are omnipotent to a certain extent. But then they leave that cocoon and go into the real world and they realize they don't have much agency after all, can't even get a boyfriend. I do think this peak at having to be held accountable for something serious she did wrong was something a spoiled only child never experienced at home. I mean, her parents seem to feel sorry for Lucy and have supported her throughout. If you had a serial killer's son or daughter, would you still make excuses for them and still dote on them? Going back to the article, when asked if it was normal for a nurse to be unhappy about not administering controlled drugs in those circumstances, Ms. Farmer replied, maybe not. She agreed when asked whether it was important to recognize when you've made a mistake. Now, there's a scene in the movie Aliens where Ripley addresses a bunch of Marines tasked with confronting the aliens, and her job is to communicate the seriousness of the situation, of these creatures that are basically serial killing large amounts of human beings, many people. And it's her job to communicate this to a group who aren't really taking the situation very seriously at all. Kind of like the growing group of folks who also want to give Lucy the benefit of the doubt. This is a scene from that movie.
Because just one of those things managed to wipe out my entire crew in less than 24 hours. Do you understand?
Now, the 24 hours that her crew were killed in Ripley's example is similar to the year in which Lucy Letby was able to do what she was doing. Could people notice the pattern? Could people defend against the pattern? Could people identify the pattern? And you might say that's very hard to do in real time, especially when there's not a lot of time, let's say in 24 hours. Or you might say it's even harder to do when there's a lot of time and you can't really see the pattern between one incident and the next if they're separated by weeks. But the issue here is that can people not recognize a pattern in retrospect after it's been set down, after it's been established?
Do you understand?
So I've presented one additional incident here. Is that all? Would you like me to continue? I mean, would you like me to deal with a second one? Yes or no?
Thank you. That will be all.
God damn it, that's not all!
And this trial feels a lot like that. Someone petitioning about all of these incidents and a group just not taking what is happening seriously. The article continues, the inquiry heard about another incident in April 2016. Letby gave antibiotics to a baby that had not been prescribed them. In an internal document reflecting on what happened, Letby wrote, I feel this situation was unavoidable and care was given to the best of our ability. It's quite interesting how she conflates her responsibility with those of other nurses. Also, how she says it was unavoidable, that the mistake was something that was basically inevitable. It's also interesting that she says, I feel this situation. Nicholas Delapour, KC, counsel to the inquiry, asked Ms. Farmer if it was unavoidable, if it was an unavoidable error. Farmer replied, no, if it's not prescribed, I don't know why it was given. In other words, was it an error or was it Lucy deliberately playing dice with babies' lives? Mr. Delapour asked her if this showed poor insight by Letby, who replied, perhaps it was. Perhaps. Does this seem like contrition, and her lack of contrition is precisely how and why it ends up becoming 7 babies dead and attempts to murder 7 others? The longer it takes to establish a pattern, the more people die in a situation like this. Again, if you can't tell the difference between whether there's a serial killer in your community, and let's face it, a substantial fraction who followed the Nicola Bully case thought that was the work of a serial killer, or if you can't tell when almost a dozen deaths are the deliberate work of a serial killer, then you may have serious problems dealing with your own reality as well as the real world. Now let me ask you again, would you want Lucy to look after your baby? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.